Hello, everyone. My name is Kristina. This presentation I'm sharing with you is a result of a community education intervention project that I designed and carried out here in New York City over the summer of 2024. The title of that project is Eating Disorders, Impact and Spreading Awareness. Before I get into the research itself, I want to take a moment to explain why I chose this topic because I think the context matters. We live in a world that is increasingly aware of mental health. We talk about anxiety, we talk about depression, we talk about burnout. But eating disorders, despite being among the deadliest mental illnesses that we know of, are widely misunderstood, minimized, and stigmatized. People call them phases, people call them attention seeking behavior. People treat them as someone making it about their body, and that misunderstanding has real dangerous consequences. This project was built on the belief that education is one of the most powerful tools we have to change that, and the data backs that up. So let's walk through this together. According to National Institutes of Health, approximately 9% of Americans suffer from an eating disorder at some point in their lives. That is roughly one in every 11 people. Think about the people in your life, your family, your friends, your classroom, your workplace. Statistically, at least one of them has been or will be affected. Eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of any mental illness, exceeded only by opioid use disorder. That means people are dying from these conditions at a rate that surpasses almost every other psychiatric diagnosis that we have. And yet, the public conversation rarely reflects that severity. So, what exactly are eating disorders? They are severe mental illnesses. The most common types are anorexia, characterized by extreme food restriction and distorted body image. Bulimia nervosa involves cycles of binge eating followed by purging behaviors, and binge eating disorder marked by recurrent episodes of consuming large amounts of food, often in secret and accompanied by intense shame. What these conditions share is that they're not about food, not really, they are about the brain. They're driven by complex interactions between neurological pathways, psychological vulnerabilities, and environmental pressures. They cause real, measurable damage to brain structure and function. Young people are especially vulnerable. Adolescents with eating disorders are more likely to experience impaired cognition and emotional dysregulation. They struggle to think clearly, to control their impulses, to make rational decisions. And it's not because of a character flaw, but because their brains are being harmed. They are also at significantly elevated risks of suicide. And many of these changes eating disorders cause in the brain are not temporary. But despite all of this, current treatment approaches are frequently focused on weight restoration and behavioral changes without further addressing the underlying neurological damage. That gap is part of the problem that this project was designed to address. Okay, to understand why this intervention is needed, it helps to name the specific gaps that exist in the community. So there are four that shape this project. The first is stigma and misunderstanding. The dominant cultural narrative about eating disorders is that they are a vanity issue, something that happens to people who care too much about their appearance or who aren't just strong enough to, just eat. This narrative is not only inaccurate, it is actively harmful. Stigma is one of the primary reasons people delay seeking help, and among teenagers especially, the fear of being judged or dismissed keeps many far away from ever reaching out at all. The second gap is the problem of delayed intervention. We know from the research literature that the longer an eating disorder goes untreated, the more entrenched it becomes. The brain changes caused by malnutrition and disordered eating patterns create a reinforcing cycle. Impaired cognition makes it harder to seek help, which allows the disorder to continue, which causes further cognitive harm. Early education is one of the few tools powerful enough to interrupt that cycle before it begins. And the third gap is the narrow focus of existing treatment. Even when people do receive care, the treatment that they receive often addresses the surface, restoring weight, modifying behaviors, without acknowledging the deeper neurological reality of the disorder. Lasting recovery requires addressing the brain and not just the body. And the fourth gap is what I observed directly in my own community. There was no accessible, targeted educational intervention a bit available to adolescents in my community that framed eating disorders as a brain-based mental conditions, which they are. That absent is what this project was specifically built to fulfill. Given those gaps, the objectives of this project was organized across three levels. The primary objective was to raise awareness and understanding, specifically to increase participants' knowledge that eating disorders are neurologically rooted mental illnesses, not just decisions or phases, not failures of willpower. The second objective was stigma reduction. If we shift how people understand the cause of eating disorders from blaming the individual to understanding the brain, we can create the conditions where people feel safe enough to ask for help. And the tertiary objective was practical community empowerment. It isn't enough to know that eating disorders are serious. People also need to know what to do with that understanding. How do you support a friend? How do you have that conversation? How do you build an environment where someone struggling doesn't have to hide? Those were the questions that this project tried to answer. Step one was a systematic review of the existing literature conducted according to PRISMA guidelines. This gave us a strong base for both the content of the educational intervention and the framework for delivering it. Step two was recruitment. 50 participants were recruited across New York City through iMessage, Instagram, word of mouth during July to August 2024. Participants spanned 5 age groups: 13 to 18, 19 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, and 50 plus. This age range was intentional because eating disorders affect people across the lifespan, and we wanted to be able to reach more than just teenagers. Step three was the intervention itself. Each participant watched a 12 slide educational presentation covering the key signs and symptoms of eating disorders, their biological causes, three main types, their neurological and psychological impacts, available treatments, community stigma, and how to identify and challenge the specific stigma and assumptions that surrounded them. The presentation was designed to be accessible, non-clinical, and appropriate for a general audience. Step four was assessment. Every participant completed an identical 26-question test, both before and after this present intervention. The pre-test established a knowledge baseline, and the post-test just measured the change. One additional question was added to the post-test to capture qualitative data about attitude shifts. This project was utilizing the accomplished framework, and certain participants were trained as health liaisons, which enabled the intervention to reach beyond the 50 direct participants into their broader social networks. Here's a slide from the intervention presentation. It's just one of the 12, along with examples of the test questions participants answered. The questions were designed to track how each person's perspectives evolved and to understand what prior experiences or environmental factors may have already been influencing their awareness before the presentation began. Now let's look at what happened. These were the results, and you can see that they are consistent across every age group. The 13 to 18 cohort began with a mean pre-test score of 23 out of 26 and achieved a perfect mean score of 26 out of 26, and each question was answered correctly on average. The 19 to 30 group improved from 23 to 24.7. The 31 to 40 group moved from 20 to 24, a 4-point gain. The 41 to 50 group started with the lowest baseline of any cohort, 18 out of 26, and rose to a 23, a 5-point improvement. And the 50 plus group went from 20 to 25. In almost every category, we see gains of 2 to 5 points after a single educational session. This is a meaningful shift in knowledge from one intervention. But the most striking find is that over 95% of participants across all age groups reported feeling more confident in their understanding of eating disorders after the intervention. That number held across teenagers, middle-aged adults, and older participants alike. What I found particularly meaningful is the performance of the older cohorts. The 41 to 50 and 50 plus groups had the furthest to go. Their baselines were the lowest, and yet they showed some of the largest absolute gains. This tells us that information gap around eating disorders are not limited to young people. Adults in their 40s, 50s, and beyond are also navigating this topic with incomplete or inaccurate information, and a well-designed educational intervention can reach them too. The data confirm that a single structured, accessible educational session can produce real, measurable gains in knowledge. This has important implications for how we think about community health education, particularly in resource limited settings. You do not need an expensive multi session clinical program to move the needle. You need accurate information delivered in a format that people can understand and engage with. The 13 to 18 group achieved a perfect mean post score, and I think that finding challenges a common assumption that teenagers are hard to reach or not interested in this kind of content is not true. Young people are ready to learn and to change. When the information is delivered without condensation and without shame, you can really see the difference. The qualitative data point to a single finding above all others. The most impactful conceptual shift for participants was understanding that eating disorders are neurological. They involve brain chemistry, not character. When people stopped attributing these disorders to vanity or weakness and started understanding them as medical realities, their entire framework for empathy and support shifted. However, on limitations, these projects have real constraint and that should be named clearly, okay? 50 participants is a small sample, and recruitments through social media introduces selection bias. People who engage with health-related content online may already be informed or more open. And without long-term follow-ups, we cannot say whether the knowledge gains participants showed were sustained over weeks or months. Further work should include larger randomized samples, control conditions, and longitudinal measurement. This community education intervention demonstrated that a single structured presentation can produce significant and consistent gains in eating disorder knowledges and awareness across teenagers, adults, and older community members alike. Eating disorders are a brain based illness. They are not choices, they are not phases, and they carry one of the highest mortality rates of any mental illness we know of. And they're still being dismissed, minimized, and misunderstood at a community level. The cycle of stigma, delayed diagnosis, and cognitive decline is not inevitable. It can be interrupted. An educational, that is, accessible, accurate, and compassionate education is one of the most powerful tools we have to do that. When people understand that eating disorders are medical realities and not personal failures, they become better equipped to support those around them, to recognize early warning signs, to create communities where asking for help feels possible rather than shameful. And this is what this project was about. These results suggest that it works. Thank you so much. Have a good day.